Hello there, everyone. Welcome back again to another episode of Live with Lindsay. So, thanks for watching. And as I had said in some of the posts, I had said I was going to take the month of December off from lives. And then I started thinking about the pandemic and how people are feeling about canceled holidays. I've seen lots of posts about the government canceling our holidays. And it reminded me of my own experience of losing my parents before the holidays. And my sister happens to be in the space of working with people who are grieving through movement. And so I thought, what better thing to do than to force her, twist her arm really hard, to come on here with me. And so she has graciously accepted. And so I'm really happy to be here tonight because I think that there's a lot of big emotions going on right now with the holidays being so different for so many people, gatherings being so limited. And so we're going to be talking tonight both from a place of grief being experienced through loss of a loved one, because there have also been many deaths, obviously related to COVID or other, but particularly with COVID this year. And then also around the grief of having the holidays be really different from what we've expected. And so if you're watching us, I'd love it if you just tell us that you're here. So we have Nicole here watching, and thanks for joining us. So just tell us you're here. Let us know where you're watching from. You can ask questions as we go through. And I just want to, before I bring Ashley in, share her bio. So Ashley Farrar fell in love with moving when she was young, because even as a child, the movement of her body made everything feel better. It changed her. It built resiliency. But in 2014, her world fell apart when her mom and uncle were killed in a car accident. Her dad died suddenly 2 years later. Through her grief journey, she began finding a new relationship with movement and with herself. She learned that she could trust her inner voice, and she dared to meet her own needs, despite the expectations of others. Ashley is passionate about helping women move through grief so they can reconnect with who they are and live with purpose. And so with that, I will bring Ashley, my sister, in to join us. Hey, Ash.
Hi.
And I just want to say hi, Patty. Thank you for joining us. And like I said, whoever's watching, let us know that you're here. So that story sounded familiar to me a little bit.
Just a little bit, right?
Just a little bit. Yeah, and I can laugh about it now, but goodness, I was not laughing 6 years back. I guess the first thing I want to start off maybe by asking is what your experience was in that first Christmas. So our mom and uncle were killed in a car accident in October 2014. And then we were faced, for me, it felt like the next day with Christmas. It came, I don't know, I may have still been in shock or was just shifting out of shock. What were those holidays like?
Hard, like really, really hard, harder than perhaps I would have guessed it would be. And it felt like a real balancing act of trying to figure out what I should be doing. Like,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Well, and then there was the added pressure of, having kids, right? Who were experiencing the death and the grief and all that, but also were used to Christmas or whatever holiday somebody, listening might enjoy, and who, from my perspective, had this expectation of this fun-filled Christmas. And goodness gracious, the last thing I felt like doing was throwing this big celebration party. Right?
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, like, had I been left to my own devices, I just wouldn't have celebrated. I was I had zero desire to do anything related to Christmas or family gatherings, but there was this piece of me that wanted to make sure that the kids still got to experience Christmas in the way that they could, because they, of course, were grieving too. And part of that was inviting other people into our family, or going to gatherings where other people could bring the magic of Christmas to the kids, so that that pressure wasn't on me anymore, that someone else could sort of step in and do the magical fun things and keep it light, and I could sort of hide in the corner when I needed to.
Yeah. So I just want to say a quick hi here to Alexandra also, who's watching. And again, if anyone else is out there, if you're comfortable, because I know, not everyone wants to be public experiencing their grief, and that is okay too. But if you are and you're comfortable sharing, let us know you're here. We also have Andrea here listening. And so thank you for joining us. So can we talk about that piece a bit about, because obviously this year, the idea of going to someone else and letting them do the celebrations for someone who's having a rough year, whether it's, again, really grief related to a death or grief related to what this past year has been, the reality of being able to take yourself to someone else's house to give that responsibility to them, unfortunately, is not very realistic. And so I think back to, even my daughter, Chloe's birthday, which was, the accident happened as they were on their way to my daughter's birthday party. And so her party was scheduled for the weekend they died. And I felt an obligation to celebrate. And when I look back, goodness, I was going through the motions, right? It's all a blur. I can't even really remember that. But that feeling of obligation versus what I wanted to do. I think there's a lot of people right now feeling that, right? I need to do all this and I'm so tired. Like I keep hearing from people, God, I can't wait for the holidays. I just need a rest. And so how can people find themselves, I guess, through all that?
Yeah. I just to elaborate on what you're saying before I dig into that, I really do think that the key is understanding what your desires and needs are, and understanding what the people around you, what their desires and needs are, and what they're wanting from you versus what you're willing or able to give. And the trick is tuning in with yourself to figure that out. And I think, unfortunately, it's a lot of hard work of sitting with yourself and being still and noticing how your body responds to certain things when you're even thinking about what's coming up. Is this bringing up, is this feeling restrictive and like you want to run away, or does it feel like something that is freeing for you and that you think will be helpful? And when you can sort of start to identify those things, and I also think like thinking outside of the box, because sometimes the things we think we need, when we really sit down and connect with ourselves, those aren't really the things that we want or need.
Right.
So it can be surprising.
Yeah. So I will just interject here for a second to say that Maddie, my niece, is watching, Ashley's daughter. Hi, Maddie. And Maddie, I was having dreams of you running in to say, hi, Auntie Lindsay, while we were doing this. Now, Uncle Eric, you enjoy restraining her. But okay, so that was a bit of a side note. But so when you were talking about what you want to do versus what you feel you should do. So you and I were talking just before we came live. We were trying to remember what our first holiday was like. And the memory that came back to me that you jogged was, so when we went back, so our mom had died mid to late October. We all went home to our dad's house for the holidays, and he was on a rampage to empty the house of anything and everything mom. And I can only speak for myself. That was very hard for me. I wasn't ready yet on two levels. I wasn't ready emotionally to let go of all of her stuff. And I also did not have the energy needed to do all of that work. And my recollection, and so our mom was a little bit of a Christmas fanatic. Is that
a little bit? A little bit. Yeah.
A little bit. And so there was a lot of Christmas stuff. And I just have these memories of the dining room table being, you couldn't see it for days, right? Just Christmas stuff to sort, and knowing within myself that, good God, that was the last thing on earth I wanted to do. Also trying to respect that my dad's need, our dad who was grieving, had a need to get this stuff out and needed help with that. And it's really messy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that was one piece of it. The other, like the thing that jogs for me the most is that he wanted everything to be exactly the same. He wanted the same tablecloth, the same dishes, and none of us knew where any of that stuff was. Right. And I kept thinking in my head, like, I don't care if we have the same tablecloth and dishes. Like, there's two empty seats at this table. Like, this is like our mom and our uncle who are always there at Christmas. This is just, it doesn't matter how much we pretend that this is the same. This is not
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah. And I'm
Yeah.
curious, anyone listening, if any of this resonates, these situations, again, whether it's around a death, like Ashley and I are speaking now related to death because that's what we know. But I think there's a lot of these emotions related to the pandemic, right? Certain members of the family wanting to do Christmas the same way, maybe despite government regulations, other members of the family not wanting to do that. And it creates an awful lot of tension. And I'm curious if any of this, so Andrea here is saying it's walking a tightrope. And it really is, because everyone has such different needs, and your needs are not right and mine wrong, or vice versa. And so how can people, like, you've navigated this really well. And so how can people, I guess, walk that tightrope the best way possible without losing themselves, I guess, like we were saying?
So my personal belief is that it all starts with, first of all, being able to accept that your needs are okay. Like, whatever your needs are, that they're okay, and they're not good or bad. They just are. And they might be different than what you want them to be, but this is just the place that you're in right now, and that's okay. And responding to yourself with the compassion and care that you would respond to a loved one, if a loved one came to you and was expressing these feelings. Because once you're able to do that for yourself, I have found that it becomes then so much easier to see through another person's eyes and say, you know what, like, what they're going through and wanting and needing, like, that's okay. It's not good or bad. And I can have compassion for that, even if our needs are not really aligning right now. And then once you get to that place, I feel like making the decision sort of starts to flow more naturally. Although it gets tricky when you're working with certain personalities and things like that, which I'm sure some of our audience members might know. And that was certainly a challenge in our family too, that, everyone has a different personality. But
yeah. The other thing that really stood out to me there that you said was, wait, it just left my head as I started that sentence. Was that, your needs might be different than what you wanted. And there's that piece, right, of like leaving yourself space to grieve that this holiday isn't what you expected it to be. And I think until you can grieve that, it's really hard to get to a space where you can appreciate much of anything about the holiday. And I say that as someone who, I don't know in my first year, to be honest, if I appreciated much about the holiday. And I think depending on what you've experienced, that may not be realistic for this year, and that's okay, But that part's important, I think.
I think even like along with that is the grieving the old you too, because grieving it like that, it's all tied together, because where you are right now maybe won't be where you are in 5 years, but in 5 years you still might not be to that person that you were before this big event happened for you. And that can be really hard adjusting to that. And I always think of it in my own experience as like losing the innocence and the trust and safety that I had in the world. And it really just felt like I didn't understand anything anymore. Like, I've been walking through this world for 30 years, and all of a sudden none of it makes sense, and I don't understand what this new world is. That can be scary in itself.
And I think people are experiencing that a lot around the pandemic, right? Because if you're a certain age, I don't even know what that age is, but you've been through other world events. I'm 43, and this to me feels like the first world event, the pandemic, the election, that I've been old enough and aware enough, I guess, for it to really impact me. And it does bring this sense of confusion around, like, what is this world I've always grown up in? This is the world I'm growing up in. This isn't the world I thought it was. And it's really disorienting. Like, you kind of lose your bearings a bit.
Yeah. And even thinking moving forward, and people always talking about like, eventually we'll be able to do these things that we want to do. And I mean, I don't know if I'm alone in this, but I think forward and think, yes, that might be true. And still we'll all have been changed from this. And we don't know what that change will feel like or be like, because we're not there, and we're not fortune tellers, whatever, future mind readers,
Yeah. I'd love to hear from those listening, if that is something you've experienced, that sense of being, I guess, profoundly changed, regardless, whether it's through the pandemic or other life experiences, but that, that sense of, there are new awarenesses that you can't strip away, of things that are going on in the world and that have just left you very different. And so how does one find themselves within that? Because so I remember, walking through this myself I used to go to the gym all the time and do Zumba, and that was a fun space. There's people I really know there, and it was just a place to like let go and be myself. And then I remember so clearly after the accident. So first of all, I couldn't get myself to the gym because it held so many good memories for me. Like that was my happy place always. And it felt sort of wrong to go there and feel happy. And so I avoided it for a long time and slowly started getting back. And I have this really stark memory of being in Zumba and, kind of forgetting about all the rest going on in my life, that my family had died and that I was actually kind of miserable, and spinning around doing some dance move, and caught a glimpse of myself smiling and laughing in the mirror. And it stopped me dead in my tracks. And I literally just started bawling on the spot because it felt so wrong to feel happy when so many things were not good in my life. And so can you talk to me a bit about that duality of experience and getting, walking through that to a place where maybe things feel a bit more peaceful?
Yeah. So I think what you're describing is so normal that so many of us experience something similar to that. I certainly did. So first, I would just say that it's like completely normal. And a lot of times the things we're going through in grief can feel really lonely, and we don't realize that other people are having those same experiences. And it's okay. And it's okay if that lasts for a while. There's no time limit for how long you need to, or that you can't express the happiness and joy without tears, right? Like if you don't want to attend an activity because it's too hard for you right now, that's fine. And only you know when the right time to go is. And a lot of times well-meaning people will suggest to us that we get back to those things. I know I heard a lot of, if you just go back to work, you'll feel a lot better. If you just do this, thing that you used to love, you'll feel a lot better. But as we know, it doesn't work that way, and you don't just immerse yourself in something and feel better. I also think there's a little bit of a connection there with almost the idea that our sadness and our really intense grief keeps that connection with our loved ones. And it feels like you're grieving a second loss, almost like now when I no longer feel this intense like weight of grief, what does that mean now? And so again, I think it's really listening to how you feel. And when you need a little nudge, you sort of know when you need a nudge, and you can the people in your life who are going to support you and encourage you without being too pushy maybe, or trying to dismiss how you're feeling about things. And you utilize those people when you're ready for that step, but you're not quite ready to do it on your own. And they can sometimes help you to support you to take that next step. And I also think as we take those steps, being mindful of the environments we're putting ourselves in, because as you know, being in the middle of Zumba class and he bursts into tears, that can be uncomfortable in itself. And is there anything wrong with crying anywhere? No, there's not. But that brings up a whole other set of emotions. And, crying in the grocery store is not the most fun and comfortable experience, but most of us, or a lot of us, have done that at some point.
Yeah. So I remember listening to, I don't know if it was through What's Your Grief or it was, anyhow, I was listening to something way back when that had said, if you find yourself in a public place and, something obviously triggers a memory or an emotional experience and you feel like you want to cry, and a lot of our reactions, because I also regularly felt like I wanted to cry in yoga. Yoga was like the worst place to be because you get all calm and you get all connected to how you're feeling. And then you realize, you realize just how crappy that is. And then you just want to lay on your mat and cry, but everyone else is like twisted like pretzels. And, but so the comment was, make yourself a promise that you will go home and cry about it later if you don't feel safe and comfortable expressing and processing those emotions there. And I thought that was a really important tip, because we can't, not that we can't, but we don't always feel comfortable, or at least I can say for myself, I don't always feel comfortable just processing what's going on in the moment. Like I remember, so our mom was a teacher, and I remember going to, so I think Logan would have been going into his first year of kindergarten, and I had no expectation of being upset going to take my kid to to check out schools. But it was when I was in the schools, I was just immersed with the memories, and just, it was tough. So again, to make that promise to yourself, I'll bring myself back to this later instead of just shoving it down. I just want to go to the comments here. Oh, sorry, you can go ahead.
I love that. I had two places and I still utilize them a lot. One was the car when I was driving, as long as you're not crying so hard that you're going to get yourself in a car accident, then you need to pull over. But in the shower too, and still to this day, sometimes that's just where, when it, been holding it back, that you can just let it all come out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think our society has a lot of messages about, stiff upper lip and all that are not the healthiest. So I'm just going to go in here. So Nicole, this really touched my heart when I read this. So she says, I completely changed when my mom died. The world wasn't the same. And now the world shook me again. I'm not sure what Nicole looks like after grief plus pandemic. And that is so profound to me, because it really speaks to my experience of grief, and probably to a lot of other people watching. And I think it's hard, to not know, like, who is Ashley,
Yeah. That uncertainty, and that it's such a weird feeling to look at yourself in the mirror. Like I remember this so strongly, like right after the accident, I would look in the mirror and it didn't even look familiar. Like my face didn't look familiar to me. So there was like this physical separation, and then that internal, like, who am I, and what, what am I here for? Like, what is my purpose? Why am I still walking the earth? And what am I supposed to do tomorrow? Or right now, even sometimes.
You're dealing with grief, and then there's also this like huge existential crisis that's layered on top of it that makes you feel doubly lost. And I think a lot of people are feeling that with the pandemic, right? Because, if you've lost your job, that's a whole identity crisis often in and of itself, right? Who am I if I'm not whatever you did before? And then there's that double kicker of just feeling worthless in some sense when you can't figure out who you are.
And I think this is a part of grief too that is surprising to people. Like in my experience, I didn't feel like a lot of people understood that it's not just like, you're not just sad that someone has died. Yeah. It's like so much bigger than that, even within your family unit. Like I remember I used to hear from people all the time. They'd say, you're so lucky that you're so close with your siblings. And well, I can hear that now and say, yeah, I am really lucky that I have some pretty kick-ass siblings. Back then in my head, I would think I'm not lucky would mean I have my siblings and my mom and uncle weren't taken in such a horribly violent way, or taken at all. Let's be serious. But within that family unit, you're still having to reorganize your whole, like when one person dies, every relationship in that family unit shifts and changes, because there's now this gap where this person used to do these things, and you're trying to figure out, like, does someone need to do that? Is that something that needs to be replaced? How do we replace that? Who transmits information between us now?
And that's not always communicated well, right? Like I remember having the realization at one point that I was kind of just expecting dad to fill mom's shoes did I ever verbalize it to him? No, I just expected, right? Like this is what my parent who's died did. I need someone to do this. And when you were talking there, I was thinking of the pandemic again, like that reorganization of roles as people have, some move to working from home, some working in sectors that are under immense demand. Like it's really shifted the family dynamics, I think, and roles and responsibilities. And that in and of itself is a huge, huge stressor to navigate.
And in homes, if someone's lost a job and then, figuring out that role, that's a really big change, especially when now is not a great time to be on the hunt for a job. So I completely agree.
A lot of grief going around.
Some similarity there. Yeah.
So I will pop in right here. So Creative Kids says, hi, Mom and Auntie Lindsay.
Hi, baby girl.
on all sorts of accounts to get on the screen. It'll work with you every time. Go find some more, Mad. and Andrea here is saying you have to try to control the things in life that you can, and the ones that you can't, go with the flow. Yeah. And one day at a time, and talk with your family. I have a great support system with family on my dad's side and my mom's, and I'm truly blessed to know all of you. Well, right back at you, Andrea. Yeah, I think that point that you were saying, Ash, earlier about figuring out the people who can't remember your exact words, but kind of support you through it in the way you need to be supported, rather in the way they want you to get through this too, is really important. Because when I look at the pandemic, and I'm curious for those listening, if you've experienced this at all, we all have varied experiences of it. And, it's easy for me, for instance, to say that the pandemic hasn't been overly challenging for me, because we have experienced no significant job loss, financial impact, death, I'm not out at work every day. And so I find that advice is often given through a lens of what that person has experienced. So for me to give advice to someone who has, one of them has lost a job, they have 6 kids, when the other spouse working from home in a small apartment, like, we are not experiencing the same things. And so it's easy for me to say, well, just take some time to yourself and relax. Like, it's terrible advice, frankly. And I know people are just trying to help. But so how can people, do you have tips on how to figure out how to figure out, which of those relationships nourish you and which suck the life out of you? To put it mildly.
It's just a little bit of a tricky one, because for me, it's like an innate gut sense, but I really do think it's tuning into how your body feels, and also noticing the thoughts I have after I'm with someone. So another grief thing, which is not super common, or super commonly known, is that a lot of grievers experience a heightened anxiety. And that can show up, for example, in things like social interactions and social anxiety, or I shouldn't call it social anxiety, because I'm not suggesting that it's anything that's, clinical or anything, but just this idea that you leave an interaction and then you're thinking about all of these things, and it's creating lots of stress for you. And that doesn't mean necessarily that that's not a person you should be connected with or friendly with, but it does give you information about when I'm really in crisis and really need someone. Is that the right person for me? And when you're around people and you feel, your body just feels able to settle into that interaction, and you feel accepted, you feel like your feelings are welcomed and accepted, I think those are the people that you really need to step towards. And in my experience, I found the people really more step towards me, and the people that started showing up, they showed themselves to me, as opposed to me having to really find them. And it's surprising, because it's not necessarily your best friend. Like, everyone has a different role in your life, and they can still be your best friend and still maybe not be the right person for this experience you're going through. And that's okay. We can't be everything to everyone.
Yeah. So maybe let's get into talking a little bit about your journey to what you're doing now, and how this experience. So Ashley teaches Pilates and eccentrics and meditation. She's a certified movement professional, I think is your certified movement professional.
You got it.
And I'm I think you and I have been people that have always been movement and activity, I think, has been a core coping strategy or stress management strategy in our lives for a very long time. But so talk to me a bit about how you got into doing what you're doing, and then moving towards specializing in part in grief.
Okay, so I'm gonna go sort of halfway from the time, and then maybe we'll reverse back a little bit for more context. But basically, what happened was, our mom and uncle died, and then 2 years later, our dad died, and I was on maternity leave for both of those following years. Like, they died a month before I gave birth, both times, and that's in some ways was a really helpful thing, and in other ways it was a really hard thing. So it kind of was like this double-edged sword. But I was finishing up that last maternity leave, and the idea of going back to work just felt like wrong. And I can't even fully describe it. It felt like it panicked me. It felt like the line of work that I had been in which I loved and loved the people that I worked with, it just did not feel like it fit who I was anymore. And it felt like all of these things I'd been working on through my grief journey, I think of myself having these like light qualities, light parts and dark parts. And some of my dark parts were being strengthened by that work that I was doing. And so it just didn't feel right anymore. And so I quit, which was hard. And I didn't quit thinking I was going to do anything. And I decided, you know what? I really like moving my body. I really like Pilates. I'm going to go and enter a program for Pilates teacher training. And I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I just want to enjoy the process. And I sort of set it up that way. Like, maybe I'll never teach, but I just want to, I just was like, I just want to do this thing because I think I will like it and I will learn from it. And it was life-changing. Like I could not have even predicted how life-changing it was. And so by the time I finished, I thought, well, like this has changed me so much. I now really want to share it with other people. And so from there, it just started flowing. And of course, as you know, one day we're just on the phone. We're like, hey, we should go to Colorado and become trained eccentrics teachers.
I was like, Ashley, you'd really eccentrics.
I remember I went in to talk to my therapist and I was like, hey, my sister and I are going to Colorado to do this thing. And he was like, oh.
I remember when I told my husband and I was like, hey, Ashley and I are going to go on vacation to Colorado to become eccentrics instructors. And he was like, what? I was like, whatever, we'll be back in 5 days.
My therapist was super supportive of it, but surprised, like just kind of like it came like out of nowhere, just like I'm just gonna fly to Colorado.
As were our husbands, in fairness, once the shock wore off.
Yes, that's true. And so then I guess I got into the grief thing because the more that I worked through that journey, and I mean, I'm not done. I still find I'm learning new things about my body, about myself. I'm feeling still new connections and new strengths that I didn't know was possible for me. And I just really started understanding the physical impact that grief has. And a lot of people are not aware that grief comes physically as well. Mm-hmm. And even grievers who are going through it don't realize that there's a connection, that this is happening because of the grief they're experiencing. And I just feel so strongly that with the information I have, that I wish I'd had that earlier to help myself and have a toolbox of ways to support myself. And I just want everyone else to have that information to do with whatever they want with it. You know, like their journey is different than mine, but you can only do what you know. So if you don't know it, then who knows what will,
Okay, so I have a whole bunch of different things I want to ask you, even though I probably know the answers to all of them. But I want to go into the comments. There's a bunch of comments here. So Barbara's here watching. Hi, Barbara. I don't know if you're still here, but hi. Diogene is saying a good point about families living in tiny places with lots of kids around. And I think the point just being that we always think we know, or not always, that's not fair, but we sometimes think we know what others are experiencing because we think we've had a similar experience, when in reality, we don't always know what's going on, behind the scenes. Patty's question here was, do you feel more energized after you've seen someone or not? Yeah. So are they energy stealers or givers? The older she gets, the less patience she has for those energy suckers. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And Ash, you had said, that you had found that you were in with work, there were dark sides of you that you felt were being reinforced. And that too, I thought was an important piece to watch, right? When are those pieces of you that are not the person you wish to be? And that's okay that we're showing up like that sometimes, but in what environments is that coming out a lot? And am I wanting to choose to keep engaging in those experiences that reinforce? And they're probably the same ones, I think, that Patty's talking about, that are sucking energy. Yeah. And then Nicole is saying the pandemic is most certainly worse for others than her also, but it doesn't mean your feelings aren't valid. Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. It's okay to be discouraged that your routine and world has changed. So on that, I would like to say, so when Mom and Uncle Rob died, I went to visit one of my dearest friends in Vancouver. And, super empathetic, caring person. I literally just cried for a week, and she listened, and like, bless her soul, it was a very healing moment for me. And at one point, her kids weren't going to sleep, and she said to me, "Oh my gosh, I'm so tired. I just want them to go to bed. They never, sleep." And then she sort of like gasped and looked at me and was like, "Oh my God, Lindsay, I'm so sorry. Your mom and uncle have just died. I can't complain about my kids." And I was like, "Yes, you can. You're allowed to be upset about this, And I think it's Brené Brown that talks about comparative suffering, that idea that if someone has experienced something worse than you, we still need to, like Nicole's saying, not need to, but there's still space for whatever everyone's experiencing.
Mhm.
It's super
It's
important.
it's one of those things that it's a never ending slide. Like you can always think of a worse
Right.
situation. No matter what your situation, you can always
Right.
think of something worse, but your pain is still real. And, when you can't sit with and recognize the pain of others, it makes it really hard to sit with your pain.
I think it's almost a way of, like, if you're constantly looking at, well, I don't have the right to experience this because someone else in the world is worse off than me. It's kind of a way, it can be, I should say, a way of not looking at your own pain,
Mhm.
right? And I mean, I know I did that after the accident. I remember talking to a therapist about how upset the kids were, and she said to me, "You're really focusing on how upset the kids are. How about you? Where are you and all
Yeah.
that?" And that was
Yeah.
an eye-opening moment, right? Of right.
Yeah.
Maybe
I
I have
feel
to
like too, just to mention that it's like also really normal if you're the person that's, gone through this thing to look at someone else and be like, what do you have to complain about? Like, look what I just went
yes.
through. And I will be the first to put my hand up that I've been there.
I've done that
I have
too.
said those words.
Yeah.
But it's just not helpful. It's not a helpful place to get to. And sometimes you just got to say like, it's not helpful, but it's normal and it's okay. And it's okay for me to feel those things. And now I can take a breath and I can face the world, in a different way. And sometimes finding someone to express those things to, like sometimes we would talk about that. Like, can you believe this person at Tim Hortons complaining about a hockey game?
Yeah,
How
yeah,
dare they? You just
totally.
gotta find your right
Yeah.
person.
And I found too that I realized that I had a hard time when people weren't being terribly compassionate towards myself,
Yeah,
than offering compassion for something like a hockey game. And so
yeah,
that realization helped me to kind of remind myself they're probably the person who needs the compassion the most, even though I'm feeling like not giving it to you because you're not acknowledging this big thing in my life and you're wanting me to feel compassionate about hockey.
yeah.
They're probably the person that needs it most. I just want to go back into the comments here, and then I want to get into talking a little bit before everyone takes off about the physical um, symptoms of grief. So Barbara's sharing, I just wanted to share that I was grieving for 10 years after my grandpa's death. And the way I grieved was I stopped sewing. And
Mm.
this past summer, I started to go to a grieving workshop and I realized it's time to work on myself. I decided to go back to sewing and I told myself I needed to heal after my grandpa's death. That's powerful. Thank you for sharing that, Barbara. I am it's it's comforting to me in many ways. I know, Barbara, to hear that you're looking at that. And it's, you know, I haven't been back to the pool since Mom and Uncle Rob died. So I was getting out of the pool. I used to swim laps, and it wasn't a conscious decision. I don't know if it was for you, Barbara. It just became a thing I had no interest in doing. And I have
Yeah.
not, I've been in pools, I've been in water. I have not gone back to swim laps since that happened. It's
I have mine too. I haven't gone back to a ballet class since, because that to
mm,
me is so connected to mom. So yeah, I really hear that. I also think what's interesting in that comment that you shared, Barbara, is that it doesn't matter how long ago the loss
yes.
happened. Like whether we're talking death of a family member or friend, or we're talking about some other loss, sometimes we're just not able to process the loss for whatever reason. And it's okay that if it takes 10, 20, 30 years, like you always have the ability to go back and, you know, do the things that you're feeling like you need to do.
Yeah. So I remember I think it would have been Mom and Uncle Rob's funeral, somebody coming up to me and saying, my mom died 20 years ago and I still think about her every day and I still cry about it. And this was really new for me like I was really early in my grief journey. And I remember thinking, yeah, that's not going to be me. Like, I'm going to get over my grief and like, I'm going to do it better than you is basically what I was thinking in my head. That's such, so my maiden name is Bainton. For everyone listening, that's such the Bainton way. Let's make this a competition and I will beat you at that grief game. Only to realize that's not how grief works and that there is no winning. And yeah. And so, okay. So I want to get into talking a bit about the physical symptoms of grief, because that's really what the work you do is. So can you talk to me a bit about what people can experience in their bodies related to grief? Because again, I think beyond talking about death, I think this is really relevant to what people are going through with the pandemic nowadays.
Yeah, I'm going to go through a ton of these. And so if you're listening thinking that doesn't resonate with me, just know that everyone's experience is different. So these are the things that could be experienced, not that every single person's going to experience them all. So there's the whole, first of all, mental thing. So there's like brain fog, you can't concentrate, you can't focus, you're making, mistakes that you normally wouldn't. You almost feel like you're underwater and the world is spinning so fast and you're like in this slow motion world where like sounds don't sound the same and like nothing feels the same thing. Like, as I said, you look in the mirror, you don't look the same. So there's that whole like, brain, like it's hard to read. It can be hard to really focus and do anything. Then there's things like dizziness and shortness of breath and chest pain and nausea, feeling nauseated. Things like aches and pains that can be really similar to flu, like what you experience in the flu, like those kinds of aches and pains. There can be like extreme fatigue, like you don't know tired kind of fatigue, like you thought you knew tired and then this happened and all of a sudden it's like so much energy to brush your teeth and you can barely do that.
I regretted so hard moving into a 2-story house after the accident because I had not anticipated how exhausting it would be. It's no longer, but goodness, for a long time, people would say to me, what does it feel like? And I would say, I can barely get up and down the stairs in my house without like feeling like I need a nap.
I have this like visual of like trying to like swim or climb through like muck. Like it's just like, it feels totally like this like
it's like doing the mutter runs or whatever, like just to get it up your stairs.
Yeah. Then there's like, for a lot of people, they'll experience like persistent pain. So for me, I woke up the day or two after the accident, I couldn't turn my head. And I still, in my neck, when the fall comes, that's where it shows up again. It's like neck stiffness and tightness. I haven't hurt myself, but that's just where it shows up. There can also be numbness. So like you don't notice when you're hungry. You don't notice when you're full. You just can't feel your body. Like you feel almost disconnected from your body. Trying to think, there's more, but that's a good number of things, and it can be debilitating, the physical side.
Well, if we think of the pandemic, like a lot of what I was seeing on social media in the early months, like March, April, was I can't get anything done. I can't focus at work. I can't, and before those articles started coming out saying, hey, what you're experiencing is grief, I think you and I had already had a conversation to say, this looks a lot like grief, because the physical experiences people were describing, which they were putting down to sometimes I'm being lazy, I'm not trying hard enough, were reminding me of my experience with grief. I just want to share Patty's comment here. So Patty's saying that a wise Caps friend, Ashley Caps, Kate Collins, Patty, one day she will be at Gala with us. And we will have so much fun. She used to dance competitively. And so the Gala actually is...
Only if I get sparkles.
We missed you at convention this year, Patty. But yeah, I'll get her there one day. Okay, so back to the comment. A wise Caps friend, Kate Collins, Powerful Journey Consulting, recommended that she go get a Reiki session. And it was transformational. I saw the 3 parent figures I'd lost in 2 years. And they were telling me that all will be okay. So relax and have fun. They were laughing and having fun. Her fear of death has disappeared. That is very powerful. It speaks to the mind-body connection, eh?
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So the other thing I was thinking about when you were talking about the fatigue was how this year was the 6th anniversary, if I'm not mistaken, of the accident. I I felt like this, I kind of felt this every year since the anniversary, that like this year was so much better, like each year gets less difficult to go through the anniversaries. And I remember you, or this might have been around Mom's birthday actually, but anyhow, at one point you and I had texted each other saying, oh, wow, I hadn't realized that I was processing this grief, but all of a sudden I have all this energy. And we hadn't realized how much our energy had dipped in that anniversary until the date passed. So we weren't outward, I can't speak for you, myself. I wasn't like lying in bed and crying a lot or really like having a hard time overall, but that fatigue just hit me for a week or two. So it's wild how much your body stores that.
It is. And I remember actually I think it was around Mom's birthday, I had sort of forgotten her birthday was coming, and I noticed I was scrolling through Facebook a lot. And that's that was one of the
totally
after the accident. I became obsessed with my phone, like could never be away from it. And it was so different from what I had been like before the accident. So it's still something I battle. And I was scrolling, and I keep track. So I was noticing it was going up, and I was like, oh, isn't this interesting that as her birthday comes up, I'm not even aware that it's happening, but it's like,
yes, but my body knows.
Go without knowing. Yeah. And so you start heading down those paths. And then I was like, okay, stop, because that's not a helpful coping strategy for me. And I know that. So put that away.
Yeah. So the other thing that was making me think of was how you and I have sent each other before screenshots of our heart rate on our Fitbits. And so I will again feel like if you were to ask me how I was doing, I would say, oh, I'm doing well. But my heart rate all of a sudden will spike 7-8 points for, I don't know, a week, 10 days. And then it just drops drastically. Yeah. And it's wild to me. My body knows.
Yeah.
Before my body knows before my brain does. Mostly.
Yes, absolutely. It's like dark seasons coming.
Yeah.
You just know. Yeah. So the other thing too, and I'm sorry, I'm like shifting us a little bit, but I thought of this. The other thing that comes up a lot with grief is because of this fatigue and all these other symptoms, we do a lot of sitting and a lot of lying. And so sometimes people call it grief posture, that like rounded shoulder, and you feel safe because you're kind of cocooned up. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with being in that position. Our body's built to be in lots of different positions. And I teach that as a movement professional, that there's nothing wrong with slouching your shoulders. But where it gets into a problem is if that's the only position you're in all the time. Your body wants to move. It doesn't like that. And so after years of doing that, my body was like having a hard time and needing to. And so I think that's really common. And a lot of times people say to you, you should go to the gym and exercise, like you'll feel better. And I mean, on the best of days, I don't like the gym. Oh, here's the other thing. You get sensory overload in grief. So this sounds like going to the gym, was like a nightmare. And I tried it and I quit because I just could not incorporate that. And so, yeah, it's just tricky because it leads to all these other things. And then you start this ball rolling that can be hard to turn around.
Yeah. So talk to us a bit about, I think kind of what you've done in the movement space has been innovative, or maybe I'm saying that just because I'm your sister. I don't know. But in fairness, I think it is. I think it is innovative in that you have an approach to movement that is much more about self-acceptance and showing up as works for you today versus, the sort of standard fitness mentality of go hard or go home. And I think that for someone who is experiencing grief, there's a lot of healing in what you do. And there's obviously the physical benefits that come with, what you do. But I think there's a lot of healing, nurturing benefits that come with it too. So can you kind of share with everyone a bit about what you're doing?
Yeah. So I aim to create movement experiences or classes for people that allow them to really be present with their body. And it's different than what you might experience in a yoga class. And as we already talked about, I mean, yoga can sometimes be hard when you're in that really deep, intense grief, or even when you're not in that deep, intense grief. For some of us, that yoga can be hard, and there's nothing wrong with that. And for some people, working through that difficulty is what they need. But for myself, I sort of teach what was helpful for me, which is this complete presence with your body, but we're moving the whole time. So you're thinking about and noticing oh, how does it feel when I do this thing? And how, how does it feel on this side compared to this side? And you start to notice, oh, there's certain parts of my body that I can't feel. You start to notice that that's changing. And I really build on a lot of the grief work. So in exercise, a lot of times we're taught sort of we're going to do this because we're reaching this goal, and we're setting goals and we're going to reach them. And instead I say, who cares about the goals? Like, we don't care about any goals. We just want to be here right now and enjoy this moment. And we want to enjoy moving. For a lot of us, like, the idea of exercise is just sounds really unappealing. A lot of us remember gym class and we're like, yeah, that doesn't sound fun. But we can. Well,
I'm like, it was. I was in the other group.
But we can, no matter what age we are, we can build this new relationship and actually find movement that we like. And what I find, it builds a lot with the grief work in terms of, you might not be where you want to be. You might want to do that exercise that the person next to you is doing, but your body might not be ready for it. And that's okay. And that's not good or bad. We're not going to label yourself as lazy or undisciplined or unfit, because what you are is a human who's going through really hard stuff. And that's okay. And it doesn't matter. Like, everyone's body has a life history. So that exercise that person is doing that you're feeling is unattainable today, there's going to be another exercise that's unattainable for them. And so really growing to accept in this moment that you're going to meet yourself where you're at and do the work in the way that works for you and love yourself through it. And so I always say to people, that time that you really want to do that thing and you understand that it's not right for you right now and you take a step back, then offer yourself the most love and compassion you can, because that's hard. And that's not what we're taught to do in a lot of times with exercise.
Yeah. I think you're giving people tools to be, right, rather than to do. And I think that's a really tough thing to do when you have experienced grief, again, whether that's related to a death or other, whether you're, I shouldn't say experiencing. And I think it gives, my experience through it has been that it helps you better connect to the signs of our body that is telling us, hey, today you need to rest. Like, I know your workout's on the schedule, or I know that, I don't know, other thing you were going to do is on the schedule, but your body is screaming at you to rest. And then to hear the day where it's like, okay, I'm raring to go. And instead of working out from a place of obligation, it becomes a place of kind of respect of the needs of your body. And I have
maybe even one day joy. You don't have to find joy from it, though. I should say that's not a requirement.
Yeah. So as you know, Ash, like I have flipped from being like the hardcore gym rat marathon runner to like being obsessed with gentle movement classes because they bring me such connection to myself, the classes, that you teach. And it's pretty special. And not to say that, people can only do one or the other. It's a pretty special.
You can do whatever you want. Question for you though. What do you notice? Do you notice any difference between your body from doing the really hardcore exercise you did before compared to the gentle?
Yeah. So I was my one therapist I used to see. So my life story is, as you know, Ash, obviously I was running marathons until I ran myself into a 2-year disability period. Probably because I wasn't listening to my body. What's that?
I said, so baiting of you.
So baiting of me. Totally. I was like, I'll just pay physio and massage every week and keep running, even though you're telling me it's not a good idea. But like, whatever, it's my body's still working, until the day it was like, no, I'm done. Yeah. And that was a wake-up call. I was 26 and couldn't walk and couldn't sit, and good God. So I'm paying a lot less physio, a lot less. And beyond that, I think I used to work out more out of a place of obligation than pure joy. And now I love it. And not only do I love it, but I can feel it in my body. It's not in my head when I miss it, right? It's not like, oh, it's been 3 days and it's, oh, I'm starting to feel stiff. I'm starting to feel like my body sends me cues of, hey, you're not taking care of yourself in gentle ways that makes it something I want to respect, because I feel better, I guess. And it's just brought me a better, I think movement for me too, although I don't teach it, has been a big part of my healing journey to get more connected to what my body is telling me.
That's been my experience too, that I actually feel a whole lot better. And so I say we don't work on goals, because I really don't work on goals. We don't come in and say, we're going to lose this weight or we're going to build up this muscle. I don't do that. But I have made more progress in my strength, in my endurance, in my ability to participate fully and freely in a class through this way, which is something I think that sometimes scares people off. They're like, what? You don't want me to set goals?
But there's like goals within, right? There's goals of like, you and I talk about this stuff all the time, right? I'll text you and be like, oh my God, I just discovered these muscles, because by developing better body awareness. And so yes, I understand what you're saying. Like, it's not about setting goal. Like, what you're doing is not about setting goals, but the goals kind of happen, or I don't know, maybe that's just my personality, but I feel like it happens. The progress happens anyhow, right? People.
Yes, that's what I mean. Like the progress I feel is, for me, is more and better than what I'd ever experienced trying to force my body into things. And I think like another big thing that we do is that we allow our body to feel that it's safe to move in certain ranges of motion. And when we're going really fast and hard, it can be really tricky to get there. And once your body understands, oh, I can move in this way and it's safe for me and okay, then the sky's the limit. Because I mean, then you can really access whatever you are feeling up to.
Right. Well, and also remember that time you went rock climbing? So,
my goodness.
There's a couple of comments. I'll get to those in a second. So, Ash and I have had chronic pain for, good God, a long time. And, I've been on this journey to respect our bodies better, but we have like this little bit of a competitive streak, not necessarily with one another, although probably a bit, but like with ourselves. Right. And, so we went rock climbing. Well, no, I didn't. Oh, I had a shoulder injury. Right. So at least I had something big enough that kept me sane. And you were like, I'm going to do it. And then I think you couldn't like move your head for 2 or 3 days. Not to say that that's like, I'm not saying rock climbing is bad.
I think it was like a month. It was a long time. I truthfully have a whiplash injury. So doing this while you're climbing is not exactly the
right. So my message here is not that rock climbing is bad. It's that by exploring gentle movement, I've learned better where that line is for me, and that it is not always worth the repercussions of certain decisions. And I say that as, anyhow, you and I have like hypermobility stuff that causes us problems. So this isn't necessarily pertinent to everybody, that piece specifically, but the message just being that it's helped me become more, to make better decisions.
Aware, more aware. Yeah. Because there's so many things you can do. So do those things, do them with joy and excitement.
So as my one therapist who I saw for my injury said to me, stop making frickin' decisions that pay my mortgage. That's, who I'm talking about here. So I just want to get back to the comments here. So Alexandra is saying the opposite of what we both experienced. A family member is terminally ill, so you're helplessly watching them fade away. I live in Germany and nobody seems to believe in anticipatory grief. Wow. You just got to wait till they die. Then you've got grief. Do you believe in that concept? And what can you possibly do in that phase, especially when COVID keeps you apart? Yeah. So what do you have to share there, Ash?
So first I would say anticipatory grief. Absolutely. Like that is hands down a thing. A lot of people, I think, like to dismiss the things that make them uncomfortable. So if they're uncomfortable with what you're experiencing and expressing, it's easier for them to say that it's not real. It is real. And what you're going through is real. I think particularly with COVID, this has been an awful year for people who are experiencing death of family and friends. Like, I can't imagine a more difficult time to be going through something like that. I think that in my experience, and we're all different, so take what you want and leave what you don't, really taking good care of yourself and really giving yourself grace and knowing that everything you're feeling is completely normal. A lot of times grievers will say, like, I feel like I'm going crazy. And other people sort of give us those messages. But the reality is that it's okay and it's normal. And allowing yourself to feel what you need to feel. Some people really like to journal it out. Some people like to create through art or music. I found nature. So nature for me was, again, with COVID, can be a bit of a challenge depending on where you are and what the regulations are. But even just standing outside with your feet in the grass if there's not snow on the ground. Well, you could like try that with snow, but I don't know how enjoyable that would be. But connecting with nature and seeing the wonder of the world, even if you don't feel wonder from it, even if you don't feel awe, maybe you feel nothing from it, but just taking those intentional steps to connect yourself to something beyond yourself. And then I think also offering yourself a lot of forgiveness, because maybe you're experiencing this or maybe not, but there might be some guilt attached to not being able to visit that person that you're saying goodbye to. And that's hard. And just knowing that you're doing the best that you can right now with what you've got, and really holding on to that truth that that's okay, that your best is good enough. I think that is a hard thing for a lot of us to do. I'm really sorry to hear you're going through that too. Just as a side note, I say to my friend who lost her loved one to a terminal illness, it's different than what we went through, but it's like a different bag of shit, but it's still shit.
Absolutely.
Like, none of it is good, and no one wants to experience any of it. So it's just a reality that it's hard. It's meant to be hard because it's an expression of your love.
Yeah. And I think the thing that came to mind that you've kind of touched on here in response, Ash, is that just because somebody says your experience of reality is not true or is not valid doesn't make it valid to you, and you, Alexandra, are the only one that can know what you're experiencing. And I think there's often well-intentioned, or sometimes not well-intentioned, but often well-intentioned people who are trying to help, who really put their foots in their mouth. And I think the more we can choose when to be around those people, maybe in moments of energy and not in moments of less energy, is helpful, but very difficult, because I appreciate that can be family, that can be close friends, colleagues. It's really hard.
I also wonder, so I'm throwing this idea out there again. If it doesn't resonate, just ignore it. One thing that we talk about a lot after you lose someone is continuing bonds and finding ways to stay connected. So it used to be believed that after grief, like our goal was to sever that bond. And now it's believed that our goal is actually to integrate that loss and find new ways of maintaining that connection. And so some of the ways you can do that is by like cooking a recipe of theirs that you love or that you have memories of, or, reading a book or watching a movie that reminds you of them, or is something that they love, or wearing a piece of jewelry, or just, anything that helps you feel connected, music. And sometimes that has been really helpful for me, finding these different ways to connect. And it's not the way we want to connect. It's not in the physical way that we really desire. And there's going to be longing for that. That's just what grief is. But what is available to you, that you can start to create these little traditions of connection. And I've never gone through anticipatory grief myself, but I wonder if you start those intentional things now, what that might be like. So I don't know, maybe give it a try and just see if it's helpful or not. And the key is to listen to your body, and if it's helpful.
Yeah. So I recently just shared, just as an example here, Alexandra, that one of the things our family does so my dad used to be obsessed with ice cream. He'd any place he'd go, he'd spend hours researching online. This is not dad at all, right? Finding doesn't sound like him. Finding the best ice cream place. And then he'd make you drive like 45 minutes. Didn't matter if it was within a 10-minute radius. You'd go 45 minutes. But it often was, really, in fairness to dad, real good ice cream. And so on his birthday, we now, as a family, eat ice cream for dinner. And that's something that is meaningful to the kids. They remember him in that way, as do I. And it's just a simple, silly-ish tradition that has meaning for us. And so I'm curious what you say there, Ash, about starting that now. I feel like that would be meaningful. So I just want to share here. So Christy, you can see my eyes. It's like I'm wearing a mask. Who's our sister, is saying that when our mom and uncle died, she had a lot of people tell her that they grieved while their family member was ill, and they felt it impacted how they experienced the loss of the family member when they passed, and that she does believe in anticipatory grief, and that your feelings are valid. It's hard when you're grieving and don't have support. That's a very good point there, Chris. Sending supportive and healing thoughts your way. So on that note, thank you, Christy. I'll just share real quick. Nicole here is saying, thank you, Lindsay and Ashley, for being so honest and well-spoken. You validated a lot for me tonight. Well, that's lovely to hear. So thank you, Nicole, for sharing that. And Patty is saying, thanks to both of you for being so open and talking about grief at this happy time of year. Good point, Patty. That's happy. Happy unless you're grieving. She's got another party, which happens to be CAPS, Ashley, the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers. Anyhow, just throwing that out there if you one day want to come on out. So where can people reach you to learn more about you and the work you do?
Yeah, so I am on Instagram at Move Through Grief. And Inspired to Move, 2 different accounts. There you go. I also actually have a Facebook group specifically for movement for grievers, and we expand on a lot of the things we touched on tonight. And I also do some little snack bites of movement for people to experience and explore. And the goal in that group is sort of to build your toolbox so that when you don't want to exercise or go to the gym, that you have strategies that you can do, sometimes just sitting on the couch. So if you're curious to join that, then you can find my Facebook page is also Inspired to Move by Ashley Farrar. And you can connect to that group from there. And then I also have a website, movementforgrievers.com.
Oh, I got the wrong one. One sec.
Or .ca. That's the same way of both. Or did you put up?
There we are.
Yeah, there you go. Same.
.ca. So you can head on over and take a look. And I know she does a bunch of videos if you're looking for some movement as you're walking through these difficult times. I know it's been super helpful to me, and encourage everyone to check it out. And on that note, I hope this has been helpful to everyone watching, and we're thinking of you as we approach the holidays. Alexandra is saying, thank you so much for your kind words and ideas. They help. Yeah. So thanks, thanks, Ash, for taking the time to come out and chat with us and share your wisdom with us.
No problem. Can I just add really quickly that if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to troubleshoot or answer your questions or create some content that answers those questions so that you can have some resources. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thanks to everyone for watching. I know we've stayed on a bit late. I figured, it's my sister. I can just keep whatever. And just her husband can keep watching the kids, So thanks for sticking with us for so long. And I'm wishing everyone, a meaningful holiday as we approach the holidays. So thanks for watching. Bye, everyone.
Bye.